Oh, hey. Welcome to Pete's Occult Books, or Pettis Occult Books. You know, running an occult bookstore is not all fun and games, as you may have thought it was. As I may have thought it was. As I definitely thought it was. Here's the situation. I made some stickers, right? Perfect bookmark, perfect advertising, perfect everything about it is perfect. So obviously it didn't work out. When you make something like this, you use a font, right? A spooky, occulty font. When you get a font, sometimes you discover, oh, whoever made this font was like, I don't need to make every single thing on the keyboard, right? A tilde? Do I need to make my own tilde for this font? Fuck it. But one of the things that it would be nice if most fonts had is an apostrophe. So I made these stickers, right? I used this font. The font didn't have an apostrophe, but I was like, it's cool. What I'll do is I will just design the sticker, and then while I'm in Photoshop or whatever, I'll go back in, I'll just put in a little mark, and everything will be great. In my haste and excitement to order these stickers, I forgot to put the apostrophe in. So Pete's Occult Books had a whole shitload of stickers with no apostrophe. So now, I get the fun job of going back through all these and putting in an apostrophe on each one. Totally unrelated news, Pete's Occult Books is hiring an intern for like 3 hours of work. And then I never want to see you again. Unpaid. Totally unpaid. Horrible working conditions. But don't you love books? Try again, Bueller. Oh, I see where we're going. So in this episode, we're going to talk about a little book called Camp Crystal Lake, Mother's Day, maybe? Friday the 13th, Camp Crystal Lake, Mother's Day, a young adult novel. Friday the 13th, Camp Crystal Lake, Mother's Day, a young adult novel, not Goosebumps, but kind of. You might notice I don't have the book with me. Here's a picture of it in my hand. You can tell that's my hand if you felt a minor amount of disgust looking at it. The reason I had to get an interlibrary loan is because if you want to get a copy of this book, it's out of print and it costs about $200, which is like $2 a page, which seems like a lot. The thing is, the licensing of the whole Friday the 13th deal is all fucked up, right? That's why they had that video game a couple of years ago, and they were going to do all these expansions and all this stuff on it, but that all got shit canned because the licensing is so horrible. So the thing is, where that leaves us with these Camp Crystal Lake books is nobody can reprint them right now, and who knows if they ever will. But let me just tell you right now, you're sitting on a gold mine. Whoever's fighting over this licensing, if you just split it 50-50, you'd be a lot better off than you are now. So what I had to do is put in an interlibrary loan at my library, where this nice old lady works doing all the interlibrary loans and occasionally has to send me an email with, subject lines like bloody muscle bodybuilder from hell. And she has to say, oh, unfortunately we can't get that for you because it just came out this year, so we're just going to go ahead and buy it. And I have to just sort of be like, yes, this is a completely reasonable email, and what I'm asking of you is also completely reasonable. So let's talk about the Camp Crystal Lake novels. But let's start with this. This is a picture of Vision from Captain America and the Avengers, an arcade game, which was pretty awesome. You could be Captain America, who looks pretty normal, Iron Man, who looks pretty normal, Hawkeye, who looks pretty normal for the comic books. They favored a lot of purple back then, it's complicated. And the Vision, who looked like this. Now, unfortunately, this game was made when this was the Vision's costume in the comics, right? I guess at the time, everybody was like, beige is the way it's going. I mean, if you move into a house that was built around the same time, you're going to see a lot of beige. Beige was classy. Beige was like the new fucking thing. I don't know why everyone was like, white is out, beige is in. It's a whole new world. It's beige. It's totally different. It's not just that I'm against beige, although I guess I am a little bit against beige. It's more that it's like, who's going to look at this costume and be like, that's an interesting superhero costume? It's basically a mannequin with a cape. But the thing is, Captain America and the Avengers came out at the time when the Vision looked like this, which means that's the version you get. It gets kind of frozen in time, as, that was his look, because at that time, they designed this look, and then some dumbass thought, this is what he's going to look like forever. I have no reason to think we'll ever change back to the other costume. So I bring that up to tell you that the Camp Crystal Lake novels take place after the events of the movie Jason Goes to Hell, in which Jason wasn't always Jason. Jason was basically a worm, a maggot, a giant maggot that could transfer between people. So, it was like you had your Jason host body, a worm comes out of him, goes into someone else, that person becomes Jason for a while, that body gets all burned out or whatever, and he keeps moving on. So this is the version of Jason that we get in Camp Crystal Lake. And the reason we get that version of Jason in Camp Crystal Lake is because that was the version that, we sort of were left with in the last movie preceding these books. I'm all for changing things up, okay? I have no problem with that. I mean, by the time you get to Jason Goes to Hell, how many times do we have to have the same sort of thing? You know what I'm saying? Halloween. I'm a fan of Halloween 3. It's different, but it's pretty good. And to be honest, it's got the craziest plot of all those movies. And this is a series of movies about somebody who escapes from an insane asylum and just starts hacking people to death. And Halloween 3 is still the craziest. The villain still has the wackiest plan. Everything about it is nuts, and I love it. I guess what's a little bit weird, though, about Camp Crystal Lake going with the Jason Goes to Hell formula is that Jason Goes to Hell was not a super successful entry in the series. And it's not like the most beloved one by quite a stretch, which is saying something when, Jason previously had taken Manhattan and later on would take space. So, when you launch a series of novels and it's kind of based on this version of Jason that wasn't a huge success, you gotta wonder why. But, my theory is this thing that I'm calling the Vision effect, which was, this was the Jason that was there at the time, so that's what we're going with. I mean, I guess the good news is somebody somewhere had a lot of faith in this design, right? Someone somewhere had a lot of faith in this idea. They were like, this is going to be what Jason is like forever. At least they had the strength of their convictions. Now let's talk a little bit about young adult novels at the time that this came out, which was 1994. 1994 was probably about 10 years before we started to see the boom of young adult / teen novels, where you'd see huge sections of those kind of books in every library and bookstore, all that stuff. I started working at a library in 2004, and their teen section was pretty small. And it would be stuff like this. You'd have some weird fantasy stuff, you'd have your Chocolate War, you'd have, your classics that people probably had to read in high school. And that was about it. It was pretty slim. It's funny because the American teenager was sort of discovered in the 50s, but then it took the publishing industry until the 2000s, another 50 years, to discover the American teenager and be like, this is an entire demographic that has money to spend on entertainment. Maybe we should make something that they would enjoy. I mean, publishing is slow, but that's slow even for them. My God. So when you look at the offerings of young adult novels from the time, there's a lot of sci-fi, there's a lot of horror type stuff. So a Camp Crystal Lake horror series kind of makes sense, really. But here's the thing. In trying to make this a young adult series, I think they went the wrong direction. Because what they tried to do is take a Friday the 13th movie and make it a PG-13, the 13th book. Lots of 13s in here. But they made it like PG-13, maybe even PG, which is kind of nuts because it's a book, right? You can't see anything. I've always wondered about this, like, books don't really have ratings like that, you know what I mean? And would most parents prefer someone read a description of a boob or actually see one on the screen? What made Friday the 13th movies kind of great was the fact that they were sort of, not PG-13. And if you take all of those elements out of a Friday the 13th story, you don't have a whole lot left. Don't get me wrong, I think it's possible to make a good PG-13 horror movie. Troll Hunter is good, The Gate, that's a good classic. But I think it might be impossible to make a good PG-13 Friday the 13th story. Let me tell you what I see as the triad of things that are needed to make a slasher. If you had a stool and it had 3 legs on it, the 3 legs would be 1, fun kills, 2, scary killer, and 3, some kind of nudity. And I think the basic missed opportunity of Camp Crystal Lake Mother's Day is that you could have pushed these elements a little further than you would in the movies. Reason being, what's someone gonna do? Read an entire fucking book to find out if it's appropriate? No. They'll just let their kids read it because it's a book. Whatever. It's in the young adult section. It's probably fine. But when you translate a Friday the 13th into a book, I think you run across problems with all 3 of these pillars. The first one is nudity, obviously, right? Description of nudity is probably okay, but it's not going to compare to just the gratuitous nudity that was in Friday the 13th for no reason other than that was an appeal of those movies, right? The second thing is the scary monster, and there's really very little scary monster in this book. I mean, like, very little. You see Jason or Jason stand-in or whatever at the very beginning, and then for maybe the last 10 to 15%. But the entire middle section, he's completely gone from the entire book. And the last thing is good kills, right? Fun kills, interesting kills. I want to see Jason putting someone in a sleeping bag and smashing them against a tree. I want to see Jason freezing someone's face in liquid nitrogen and shattering it. Those aren't even from the good Jason movies, but that's the kind of thing that you're like, well, at least it had that, right? Mother's Day doesn't really have any interesting kills. People just kind of get stabbed. Really, it just leaves us with a very basic plot that follows a bunch of teenagers. They go to Camp Crystal Lake, and they go there because, no one else will camp there, so it's fairly deserted because everybody else is too smart to camp where people keep getting killed. We've got our protagonist, our final girl, who's, the good girl. We've got a jock asshole. We've got sort of a wild man. We've got a French foreign exchange student girl. And we've got another couple. That's basically it. And we spend the bulk of the book just sort of like watching these characters do stuff that these characters would probably do. Oh, and we've got the nerd. Of course we have the nerd. So we spend a ton of time getting to know these characters, but they're not super interesting. You don't really care about them. And you're just kind of waiting for anything to happen, really. And it's a long wait. I think there's some element of the way this book turned out that's probably not the fault of the writer, Eric Morse, which is a pen name for William Pattison. Pattison has written some other horror novels, and I'd like to check one of them out. I just kind of want to see what he does when he's off the chain. I mean, Mother's Day wasn't something I enjoyed a whole lot, but it did kind of feel like maybe he was tied down by the lore kind of a lot. It does feel like maybe he got a script for how the movie needed to go, or the book needed to go, or an outline or something like that. We need this, and this. I mean, it kind of does feel like maybe this was a product because some executive was like, well, we have the Friday the 13th license. We don't really have any plans for it. How could we cash in on that, though? Like, without making a movie. I know, we'll crank out a bunch of books, we'll see what happens, right? Goosebumps is big at this time, Fear Street, all that stuff. Let's just jump in on that bandwagon. And word on the street is that Eric Morse wrote the 4 volumes in the Camp Crystal Lake series all inside of 1 year. They're all pretty short. They're efficient books, and they're not like terrible to read as far as the prose or anything like that. It doesn't feel like it's as complete as it could be, or it doesn't go anywhere that you really want to follow. Now, Morse did write a 5th book, kind of just on his own, as sort of a labor of love. It's a bit available for free online, and I would be curious to read that to see kind of what happens when he does whatever he chooses. And I do want to say, for the shortcomings of the book, I think Eric Morse understood the assignment, right? Write a PG-13 Friday the 13th movie, put some references in there. There's a canoe at one point that I'm pretty sure is supposed to be the canoe from the first movie when Jason pops out of the water like fucking Jaws or Bruce the Shark. I'm not always the hugest fan of Friday the 13th movies, but I do feel like Eric Morse got the vibe. This does feel like sort of a fleshed out outline of a Friday the 13th movie that just never got made for some reason. I do have to be honest too, I've only read the first book in the series so far. I have to put in my next request with the nice old lady, interlibrary loan lady, and it's possible that this is like a Force Awakens thing, right? Where they have to establish this Friday the 13th world in the books. Maybe, I don't know who would have read these books and not seen the movies, but if there are those people out there, maybe those young kids, haven't seen Friday the 13th movies, so they have to establish the lore. They have to establish what's going on. Maybe it does go somewhere more interesting in the subsequent books. I don't know. So, I think with a little bit longer timeline, a little bit more of an idea of, I don't know, spirit of the movies as far as like some of that gore, some of that reveling in the, brutality of it. I think, if Eric Morse had been a little more free to use other Jason ideas outside of Jason Goes to Hell ideas, if only like 5 to 12 factors were different, I think there's like an idea here that just sort of sadly didn't pan out. This is Apeshit by Carlton Mellick III. This is basically a slasher. It's a cabin in the woods, stuff happens and gross things go on. And I think one of the keys to it, and something that Carlton Mellick III has talked about, is keeping it short. Keep it short, keep it compact, keep it efficient. Write a slasher book that takes about as long to read as it would to watch a slasher, right? You don't need to live in that world forever. You don't need to go on like a David Foster Wallace 1,200-page slasher adventure. 160 pages. That's all you need. So there you have it, Camp Crystal Lake Mother's Day. Kind of a diversion down a path in the book world. A little too late for Halloween, so, we're kind of still on brand here. I like that it's an interesting failure. I prefer that to, I guess, a boring success or a mediocre milquetoast success. Speaking of boring failure, I'm gonna get back to work. Let me know if you want one of these stickers. I'm gonna call these apostrophes an autograph. Charge $10 extra for them that way.